No, yeah. So these patch notes are. I didn't really expect a patch actually. But welcome back. This is Scarra here. I'm doing my 6.20 patch notes. I guess before I start on these, I usually like to talk about what I like to see changed or any of that. But it's really strange for me to talk about that because usually I talk about it in context of leading up to Worlds and the patches there. However, the last two patches aren't being played on Worlds, and this after Worlds, usually what happens is that Riot scraps out everything for a preseason patch. So I don't have really think anything to start to say at the beginning. If anything, this patch stuff like this is just there to increase the quality of life for certain champions and like players before the big preseason patch comes out. In my opinion, I don't know exactly how many patches they are away from preseason. I imagine it's less than 5. So with that being in mind, I have no expectations going into this. Uh, let's see what happens. Oh, this is the Yvern patch where the new tree champion comes out, which has some really weird, wonky jungling kit. Really cool. Anyways, let's keep going. Ashe. Passive crit slow is stronger, but decays to normal faster. Q no longer fully resets Ashe's attack timer. Really? That's such a big nerf. Usually what ends up happening with Ashe is you would auto immediately Q to do an auto reset to do your most burst damage with the W. But now it's not the same. Oh wow. Okay, so her frost shot skill is much better on the initial hit. It's triple the base slow, meaning it can go up to 60% rather than 50. I think overall it's just a change because at the very highest level of play, when you get the most crit, probably at 3 or 4 plus items, this is gonna be a buff. But for the earlier parts of the game, this is probably gonna be end up being a nerf, except for at level 1. It's okay. It's the not resetting the Ashe auto attack timer is much bigger than the passive on the frost shot, in my opinion. Reduces her basic attack delay to 40% of the full value. So no reduction to delay is already below 40%. I actually don't know what that means. I think that means that if you have more items and you have a lot of attack speed, you don't end up getting the full benefit of it. Or this is a I still think this is a nerf. It just seems like they're giving champions an easier time to close the gap. I don't really like this. I don't think that Ashe necessarily needs as many nerfs as she has. Like she's already got substantially nerfed. I think the last 2 patches where they took off stuff on her Q, on her ulti, and maybe it's okay to have one of these 2 nerfs, but definitely their Q no longer resetting the auto attack timer just seems really big. Like to me, it seems like they just want to put Ashe down and knock her off her top 4 throne. I don't necessarily know if that's good, especially with the rise of champions like Ezreal and Jinx necessarily. It's gonna be hard for Ashe to find a real spot back up. So I don't think that she needed to be nerfed, but I guess she did. So we'll just keep going on. Cho'gath. Okay, Cho'gath sucks. He's not a very strong champion at the moment. He tends to be beaten out by other champions. He has decent amounts of sustain, but other new champions have either better sustain or better ways to deal with Cho'gath. So what are they doing with Cho? There's Crusade to fix cone spells. So it used to be that when Cho hits start targets you with W, when he W's outwards, the silence gets applied immediately. It's not possible to dodge the silence because it's faster and it's faster than the hitbox. Like there is no startup on the silence, even though it looks like there is. So what are they gonna do? Oh wow, they gave him CDR scaling on his abilities. Oh, it's been forever. That's actually such a big buff. So they increased the range. Of his W. They decreased the CDR. They decreased the silence. Oh, that actually sucks. Huh. But the offs the like I guess that's the only way they can balance that correctly because they gave him four free seconds off Feral Scream. That's actually a really big buff. I'm actually kind of interested in Cho'gath after these buffs. The range increase and the silence duration And the cooldown reduction nerfs help out a lot. That's one of the things I really hated about Cho'gath was that he doesn't really get benefit that much from leveling the ability. Especially his W was just the silence duration increase. The fact that it feels like he's more modern in the fact that you get CDR scaling with the levels in the ability now, and that's very, very nice to have. And I'm glad that there's more counterplay because you don't get automatically caught in the silence anymore playing against Cho'gath, however rare that is. I think it's nice. I overall like buffs to Cho'gath and more clarity. It's okay. We'll see how it works out. Jinx. Mana cost up and damage down. Toned down many of Jinx's strongest lane opponents over the past few buffs. So they lowered the base damage on Flame Chompers. Oh, they increased the mana. Okay. So it's just to make it so that they take away power from her somewhere because her win rate's starting to skyrocket, and they're worried that they over buffed her and I think she's gotten better because a lot of the other champions ended up getting nerfed, and so she's slowly rising up, and against certain comps she's pretty good into. I think if they wanted something to nerf that really would take power away from her, probably the passive would be a good place to nerf it, but I guess it's an okay way to nerf her as well. Usually, sometimes I don't like mana nerfs, especially on AD carries, champions that can't get mana, because it feels like you're punishing the player for playing the role rather than anything else, because you really don't want to get Essence Reaver on this champion, and it means that you just can't use the abilities that are in the champion's kit as much as you'd want. And League has deviated quite a bit from other MOBAs like Dota, where you might only be able to use your abilities on one rotation and you're down to 0 mana. I think I don't really like mana cost changes on her, but I understand that they had to take away power somehow. I think 70 is a lot of mana, or is a decent amount of mana now. Okay, not what I expected, definitely. Nunu. I don't know what they ended up doing with Nunu. I think Nunu right now comes from the fact that he's kind of an old champion, and in my opinion, the best thing to do with Nunu is probably to align more power into one ability. So you remember what Malzahar happened? They made it so that his Voidling passive kind of worked with another one of his abilities, or became one of his abilities, and he got a new passive, which is essentially what the W became. I think the same thing could happen for Nunu, but that's a really big rework. So in my opinion, something like shifting the power of the W over to the Q and having it so that he can Q champions as well as creeps, and that when he Qs champions, he can give them, he infects them with a buff. I think would be kind of cool, and then he'd get a new ability as his W, so that he'd become more, I guess, modern and less of a champion that only has one button or two buttons in a team fight. Really, just one button. Let's be real. So what are they gonna do for him? They want to buff him. Okay, we'll see what happens. Increases base AD stat growth. I don't really think that's what keeps him out of contention for a good jungler. But base damage buffs are always really nice because he tends to have to auto camps a lot. What do? They nerf they buff the cooldown on his Q. He no longer gains unique benefits for casting Consume on neutral monsters. However, each large monster consumed gives him well fed, grants 10 as combat move speed, 3% max health. So they combine multiple buffs to put, and it stacks refresh on each cast of consume, falling off every 70 seconds. What an interest! It's like they gave him Cho'gath ulti on his Q. Essentially that's what it is, because you get extra health and you get movement speed, so you're able to counter jungle better. I like it. It's essentially consolidating a lot of power into his kit more. I don't know. I think he's actually really strong in terms of getting 15% max health. That's a lot, and 50% movement speed out of combat. Maybe it might be overtuned because he already has an insane amount of health on his, I think, base stats already. So we'll see where it goes. It's definitely an interesting buff, and I can definitely see this champion coming back, especially with the rise of stuff like Jinx. Jinx, Nunu has always been a comp where you just protect the Jinx and then she 1v5s, and I think that generally You just toss like a Karma in there, which is because the Lulu's really nerfed. You toss a Karma mid lane or support in there, and then Jinx becomes an unstoppable monster. So I think his time of rising may be here off these buffs. The ulti actually increasing to 95% duration slow is really nice. It allows you to be able to keep them into your ulti and has no cast time. I actually think this is a much bigger buff than people realize, because this big of a slow means that you can't ignore Nunu. How he frontlines for the team is he casts ulti, and sometimes they can just run through it, or sometimes they can like double dash through it, or dash through it. But this makes it so he has to be interrupted or has to be dealt with, because you just can't ignore a 95% slow. I like it. We'll see what happens. Taliyah, okay, they nerfed Taliyah out of the map, essentially. So I wanted them to just rebuff her Q to do more minion damage again. So from 50%, let's go. They went to 0 for 50, and then I would say, okay, give it to 20%. That's a good middle ground, and she'd probably see a decent amount of play from there. But instead, what ended up happening was their current changes base health regen. That's, by the way, that's really good for laning. Super nice. And they buffed her Q, which is really scary, because I never had a problem with Taliyah Q late game. Like, I really thought that Taliyah scaled fairly well. She maybe have a mid game spike that's fairly low, but when you get to the 40% CDR, her Q does a lot of damage. And so they buffed not only her early game, it also buffed like her mid and her late game, which was really scary, because it feels like they had a winning solution with the champion before, and rather than reverting some of the nerfs back, they decided to buff her in a different direction, which could cause her to have balance problems in other ways. Like, this definitely isn't the way that I would have thought they would have buffed her back into viability. I guess we'll just see what happens. But 1 second off of her main damage ability is actually a huge buff, like an enormous buff. Yeah, it's not what I expected, and you might have problems against Taliyah if she gets to her damage items or snowballs, like even more than before. Vladimir, I don't think this champion needed any buffs. In my personal opinion, I thought Vladimir's still getting picked at Worlds right now because he's a good champion. He may be more situational than before, like playing him against certain champions may not feel as good. However, I think that he's strong and rewards players who are able to get him out of lane. Get him out through the laning phase. I think that it's way too quick to consider rebuffing this champion back. And that's essentially what they're doing. And that really scares me, because they didn't even wait for him to see. They kind of waited like 2 weeks to see how he plays out, and they're just like, this champ sucks, so we're just gonna immediately buff him. I don't think he's nearly as bad as they think he is, and buffs like giving him extra Q ratio are making it so that they essentially shifted the power to where they want him to stack more AP rather than health, which makes sense. Definitely, so they're pretty mad at people being able to rush Spear Visage first and having it to be the most efficient buy into like rallies or stuff like that. And it makes sense. However, I guess overall the changes aren't too big of a buff. It's only probably going to be really big after 2 or 3 AP, like 3 AP items. I don't think necessarily Vladimir needed that many changes, but I understand them shifting his relative power away from the tank stat itemization over to the mage stat itemization. I like the idea, but I don't know if necessarily if he needed more buffs to go along with it. So instead they increased the missile width and spawn. Maybe this isn't really that much of a buff, honestly, because they lowered the health scaling. It could mean that itemization wise, Visage becomes less likely, and stuff like Abyssal Rush into Proto Belt will be more effective. I very much doubt that's true, but if that does become a problem, or does become likely, then he's still going to be really strong. I don't think he sucks. I don't think Vladimir sucks for competitive play. I just think people just aren't good at him. That's just my personal opinion on it. Because people don't, like, it's a champion where you need to put a lot of games in to know just how much he heals and just how much damage he does. And a lot of people think that they're God mode when they get one item on Vlad, try to kill backline and they die, and they're like, wow, I saw all these other players play Vlad like this, why can't I do it? And if he falls behind, he's not an effective champion. So being able to keep yourself, you have a lot of ways to be able to make sure you get to the point where you can be effective. and you get punished if you mess up. I don't consider that to be a bad champion. In fact, I think he has very clear strengths and weaknesses, so to speak. All right, let's go down. So Yorick, I don't think he has. I don't think he's very good. I think if you're not head in lane, he's fairly weak. So giving him extra utility or extra something would help a lot. Even if it's just like he gets move speed buffs when when you hit a champion with your E, would be nice. So threshold for summoning graves is set to 4 on howling. Okay, that's completely useless. Now, okay, wait. Well, now cast has maximum range. Oh, and now it only marks champions. Oh, thank God. And champions and monsters, so you don't you don't hit random other stuff. I like that. It's just to make it so that you can, and this casts outside as maximum range. This is also really nice. I wish they kind of changed his E to do that as well. Right now, Yorick's E is in a really odd space because usually when you fling out his E or an ability, a cone ability like that, it would just cast in the general direction into max range. If you put it like all the way over there, like cast as soon as you walk up. But Morning Mist, his E actually casts 200 range short of the maximum cast range. So what you have to do, and this is really awkward when you play this champion, you have to automatically know your E range. You have to cast your E on the ground rather than on the champion because or else you overshoot the ability. Like you're 200 range into the ability or 150 range into the ability. It's really strange. It's something that you won't notice unless you play Yorick. It's just the only cone ability in the game that does that right now, it feels, and I think that they should definitely change that so that that's not the case. Also, if I could control her Yorick's ulti, that'd be really nice. To like Annie ulti, that'd also be nice. Like I don't know necessarily if he needs that many buffs. I just would like usability buffs, so to speak. Like onto his ghoul and onto his ulti. I just talked about how his ghoul, if you could like literally walk into a bush and the ghouls will stop attacking the champion. I think it shouldn't be like that. They should chase him through the bush if you do land your E. Kog'Maw, we don't have buffs for Cho'gath yet. Oh, they make it so it's animation matches. Okay, that's fine. Shyvana, Q animation visually sped up. It doesn't change anything on actual damage timing, but it looks nicer. I'm down for aesthetically pleasing. It's cool. Baron Nashor on Summoner's Rift. Now we made Baron Nashor much bigger to make the encounter appropriately epic. As a result, you can hide inside Baron through positioning tricks. So knock up when dashing over Baron reduced. Oh, so like when you lead sync Q onto Baron, you get knocked back, and it's really annoying to play. So what they did was they just made it so his knockback collision is 66% shorter. All right, I don't think they needed to do that, but at least they gave their reasoning for it. It's not a big deal for me, so to speak, on whether or not this is in the game. I think it's just almost completely irrelevant. I don't play Twisted Tree Line, so I'm not even bother looking at this. Basic attack canceling is more consistent. Movement orders issued 0.03 seconds before attack fire will no longer cancel it. The movement will now occur after the attack fires. So it's easy to attack cancel. Alright. It'll be nice. I don't know what it means because this is something where it's like you see the numbers, but you have to get a feel for it. But it seems like it's a good thing to have in the game. Basic Hecarim's E can now critically strike. Is that a joke? I don't. Alright, I don't necessarily know. Like, I already get one hit by Hecarim's E when I'm playing against Hecarim, so I don't necessarily know if he needed that buff, but sure, why not? Pantheon is no longer locked out of his active items if he dies during Grand 5 Skyfall. Oh, this is the really big buff. I saw this. It means you can't Riven E or like Riven E over Jarvan ulti, stuff like that. Or I don't think you can Vayne Tumble over it either. It makes it so like essentially Jarvan ulti is more of a buff, and you can now work around. You don't get countered by so many movement abilities as well. I think it also matters for a Nivea wall, stuff like that. I think this is a really nice buff. This is actually a bug fix that actually matters, which is nice. There was one other buff that was really good. If I remember, there was something else they were gonna end up doing here. No, you can't Riven E across terrain. You can third Riven Q over it though, but E doesn't get you over walls like Riven Q does. Yeah, it's a really nice buff for Jarvan, for sure. The rest of the stuff, it's pretty good. I heard that you can now get. I heard that you now get something else where like the roles auto align into the tab screen, but I can't find it. But if that is true, that's a really nice mechanic because I always have to reorganize it. It makes me mad. So I'm glad they're able to do this. Overall, the patch seems pretty good. I don't have really any big problems with it. It's just again, it's such it's a lower impact patch because preseason is so close. So at most they can release one or two patches before preseason. So at best it's just kind of band-aid fixes until they do the big sweeping fixes for preseason. Anyways, cool. I'm gonna go play some math. See you guys in a couple minutes.
I don't know how much you get from Nace's Q. Whatever the fuck it is.
It's +6 on a champion, I think.
+6.
I rapid fire cannon. We won.